Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David Jameson. I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner for the West Midlands. Welcome to the Strategic Police and Crime Board. Today, 19th of May, 10:03 a.m. This morning, we're going to be looking at the revisions to the Police and Crime Plan. And we have with us this morning the Deputy Chief Constable, Louisa Rolfe, and we'll be joined later on by Chief Superintendent Claire Bell. We also have all the usual panel members as well, plus members of staff from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. And just before we start, can I just say to Louisa, the Deputy Chief Constable, Louisa, this is going to be your last meeting with us as you're going soon to join the Met. Can we firstly thank you very much for all the wonderful work you've done with us over the last few years. We really have appreciated you in these meetings and in all the work we've been doing, and we wish you well for the future in your new post. And who knows, we may see you rising even further in your star, maybe further in the sky sometime in the future. But thank you very much indeed. Just a few introductory words from me. At the moment, the compliance of the public to the rules that have been set out by the government apropos COVID-19 are being well observed by the vast majority of people in the West Midlands. I think we'd fully expect that. People of this area, as they are in many other areas around the country, are people of good sense and will do what is required in this particular emergency. Of course, there are a few people who are not compliant. They are a small minority, but the sort of people that wouldn't be compliant to any of the laws and rules in the ordinary times anyway. But I want to say that officers over the last 2 months plus now have done a wonderful job, and I do thank them very much for the work they've done, their forbearance in dealing with many difficult situations, and using a lot of discretion and good sense in many circumstances. And I think it's true to say that we're perhaps in the middle of the range of using the enforcement methods. And I think that shows that we've taken a proportionate approach and that we've used persuasion, as we always do, rather than trying to enforce the law on people. So, well done and congratulations to people. But there will be ongoing concerns. And I think one of the greatest ongoing concerns that I have is for young people. And if I could just cite two categories of young people for whom I have concern, and they're mainly to do with younger males. The announcement we had last week was announcing some schools going back, although about 1 in 40 children have still been in school all the time from key workers. But the question now of children going back into primary school, I very much welcome the reopening of the schools, as long as it's safe to do so. I'm very much welcome that. Then others have to make a decision on that. It's not for me to make a decision on that. It's down to the governors of schools, advised by their head teacher and by government and their scientists as to what is safe for them to do. But I have a concern that one group of children was not mentioned. That's children in the early secondary years, 11 to 14 years of age, years 7, 8, and 9. There was no intention that I heard of them going back to school before September. Now, that is profoundly concerning to me, that large numbers of younger children, those who are more likely to be swept up by the gangs and taken into county lines and getting to all sorts of other things, very undesirable things, those children will be available for those criminals to take them on. I think the government needs to urgently look, if the schools are going to reopen, there's going to have to be some ongoing education for those younger teenagers as well. And it could be making provision for them to have good quality distance learning, or having some time in the school so they keep contact with their studies. Once those children have got out of the discipline of getting up in the morning, doing the work, and the rhythm that there is of being in school, by September or even beyond, as we hear, that may be very difficult to restart that, particularly, I think, for young boys. And the other group that I have concern with is the younger men. We know traditionally that in the crime figures, we've seen younger men, particularly 18 to 25, are very heavily represented in the crime figures, much more highly represented than young women. And as the next few weeks come on, and we see more and more of them being unfurloughed, we'll find that they have no job to go to. They will be signing on for unemployment benefit. I think there could be huge numbers of those young men. And what worries me is that they too may find themselves without a job, very little money, and may find themselves going down firstly to antisocial behaviour and possibly then moving on to more serious criminality. And others will have concerns about this. I think for those children and for those younger people as well who are out of work, there are some really quite critical issues to do with their mental health, of being at home and not being having a purposeful role in society will lead to problems for those people. But that on the mental health side is for others to consider. But my consideration, of course, is for the crime that may appear. We'll now move on to item 2 on the agenda, which is notes of the last meeting. They are being circulated. They're there on our website. I don't think there are any actions that are coming from that meeting, so I'll move rapidly on for questions from members of the public. We haven't on this occasion received any questions from members of the public, although we will be very open to receive them for the next meeting if anybody wants to ask such a question. Now we move on to item 4 of the agenda, which is the item which we considered last time. We were going to consider last time, but in the end there wasn't sufficient time. And this is the first part of the emergency police and crime plan priorities. And I'm going to ask Alethea Fuller, who's the Deputy Chief Executive of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, who will be joined, I understand, by Maureen Colony, the Chief Executive of Birmingham Women's Aid. She was going to speak a little bit later on to this item. So, Alethea, can I ask you to present your paper, please?
Thank you, Commissioner. So as you say, the emergency plan was launched in April and sets out the key actions that the PCC expects the Chief Constable to deliver, as well as the tasks that the PCC's office is undertaking. It builds upon the police and crime plan that was launched in 2016 and will last until May 2021. So this report sets out how the OPCC has been supporting organisations who receive grants for services, how we've been leading the criminal justice response to COVID-19, how we've ensured a joined up and whole systems approach to the work that we're doing, working in partnership with other organisations, and how we've utilised our existing structures, such as the West Midlands Community Safety Partnership, the Victims Commission, our Criminal Justice Board, to respond to the emerging needs of the public. So what we've done is galvanised and worked with our existing structures to look at how we respond to the needs of the public. What I'll do though, Commissioner, is go through the report and pick out some of the highlights of the work that we've been doing. So the Commissioner pledged to continue to fund all of our commission services across all of our significant budgets, and we've worked with them to adapt their service offers, many by offering significant offering services remotely, virtually or online through social media platforms such as Skype and online meetings. We've worked closely with our providers to understand the impact of COVID on their services and supported them to change their method of delivery and timescales for delivery where necessary. So an example of that is Victim Support, who offers our first contact assessment and referral service. They're offering a live chat service, which is available 24/7. So if victims of crime need support and they've not reported it to the police, they can go online and be supported that way. As we know that for victims of crime who are living with others and could be self-isolating with their abusers, whether or not they are partners or family members, live chat is an important way for them to access practical and emotional support in a discreet way. Also, My Support Space is their online platform to help people cope and move forward, and includes resources for dealing with things such as difficult emotions, offering coping strategies, trauma, and how to sleep. So these are all common issues that people may experience after crime, that may be intensified during the pandemic, and therefore it's important that the public knows that those services are available, still available online, just being offered in a different way. West Midlands Community Safety Partnership has moved to regional commissioning, and what we've ensured is that the services that are being offered are still taking place. So we continue to work with our partners to respond to emerging issues locally. We meet with the 7 heads of community safety weekly to ensure that we've got a clear picture of what is going on across the 7 local authority areas. We're giving them the flexibility within their budget allocations to respond locally to the communities as needs arise. And we've been clear that they're able to work with providers to flex and change their provision if necessary to do so. Meanwhile, we're in the current situation. The force is leading on the tactical response to COVID-19, which picks up operational delivery in respective communities, and we're working with them. So we've done things like change active citizens fund to enable the force and partners to respond to emerging needs. And we've been working extensively with our partners across the criminal justice system. And here I'll ask our head of policy, Meg Jones, to update the board on the work that we're leading on, both locally and regional, across the criminal justice system.
Thanks, Alethea. In terms of criminal justice, the PCC role is as chair of our local criminal justice board. The PCC works as a convening power on some of the key issues across the system that do require a system-wide response. And the strength of that board is in identifying and tackling issues as a system, helping to prevent silo working. As the national emergency took hold and we entered lockdown, each criminal justice partner agency developed their own contingency plans to respond. It was essential to bring partners together very, very quickly to ensure that individual agency contingency plans would support the whole system during this very challenging time. And then in terms of avoiding duplication and in order to strengthen the pace of that work, we worked with PCC colleagues in the wider West Midlands region. We convened our existing structure of the Regional Criminal Justice Collaboration Forum, which is made up of the heads of criminal justice agencies, the 4 forces in the region and other partners, including health and witness services. The forum is intended to do a number of things and has already met a number of times during this period. It intends to translate the national criminal justice system response at a local level. It identifies local issues which could be progressed through a task and finish group, such as the prison early release programme. And it also intends to translate local and regional issues back up to national level and share good practice of work happening locally. The forum is chaired by the West Midlands PCC, and we've seen considerable impact of this work across the system. We're now identifying emerging issues much quicker. We've worked through the issues of early prison release, and we continue to work on the significant backlog in the court system and identify issues to be actioned by the task and finish groups. One of the delivery groups which sit underneath that regional forum is the recovery group. And to support the response and recovery to COVID, the delivery group is focused on both the immediate issues of the system and the plan for post-COVID, and has been chaired by the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner. It has since developed a system-wide action plan to look at this. The focus is on significant issues such as the court backlog, but also we're focused on identifying changes of practice across the system that could be worth retaining in a post-COVID criminal justice system. This work is absolutely essential because it's focused on ensuring that the public are able to retain their confidence in the criminal justice system throughout this period. The early prison releases were announced a number of weeks ago, and the Deputy PCC is continuing to chair a task and finish group on both early prison releases, but also the business as usual releases as well, recognising that those being released from prison at the moment are being released into a very different world than would have been. The group have made considerable progress in tackling this as a system, despite the quite low numbers that have been released as early releases. We've considered the need for continuity of care from prison back to local drug and alcohol treatment services, support to reduce reoffending, potential impact on victims, and ensuring appropriate accommodation on release. The group has been effective in aligning the priorities of multiple agencies by collaborating and caused agencies that have different governance structures and terms of reference to come together. An example of this has been the cooperation between probation and West Midlands Police on sharing of intelligence checks for those that have been considered for early release and ensuring that they are not a risk to the wider public. The group have made considerable progress in tackling this as a system and have considered both also the impact on reducing reoffending. This has led to the PCC promising to deliver a prison release package. That was due to, as Alethea has just said, the pledge to support organisations which receive grants whilst the current public health emergency continues, the impact of early releases from prison, to support additional business as usual releases from prisons with an aim to reduce reoffending and save costs to the criminal justice system. And the package of support is intended to complement the existing support provided by MPS, CRC and other contracts. Current PCC providers have been contacted regarding their ability to flex their current services to support this work. This covers a number of existing streams of work, including the New Chance programme for women, NHS England Prison Release Project at HMP Birmingham, and the Resettlement Project from the Violence Reduction Unit. Their support as providers and innovative working has been recognised by the criminal justice partners and should absolutely be congratulated. In terms of the additional areas that we currently cover to support reducing reoffending, and significantly looking at the current backlog within the court service, we also continue to work on developing approaches to tackle the root causes of crime. This approach evidently has a better outcome rate in reducing reoffending and the cost to the system. So the Cranston Arrest Referral Service, which went live in January 2020 across all of the custody blocks in the West Midlands, has worked very, very closely with probation colleagues in the courts across the force area, completing assessments for drugs and alcohol and supporting the development of pre-sentence reports. This service continues to operate under COVID-19 and has meant the numbers of drug rehabilitation requirements and alcohol treatment requirements granted in courts have significantly increased since January and continue to do so through remote working under COVID-19. These orders help support individuals to tackle addiction and prevent future reoffending. The New Chance programme, again funded by the PCC, supports female offenders and continues to operate using remote working through COVID-19. We're working with our providers to expand the referral pathways to ensure that women who need the support offered are able to access the service. Women are supported and diverted away from the criminal justice system at an early stage, recognising the variety of vulnerabilities these women may be facing. Therefore, support is provided on various issues ranging from mental health, substance misuse, child safeguarding involvement, past trauma such as abuse or rape, homelessness, domestic abuse and debt advice. Under COVID-19, our providers are concerned about the impact poverty could have on women in particular, who may struggle with children also at home rather than in school. This indicates that the work that we have already had in place and the structures that we have in place on criminal justice have been utilised as fully as possible to ensure that we can deliver a collaborative approach to the criminal justice system and avoid working in silos, but also means that we've worked really closely with our providers to make sure that we continue to reduce reoffending and work with the significant court backlog to deal with these issues as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Megan. Alethea, have we got Maureen to make her contribution?
Commissioner, Maureen will be joining us for the second report.
I beg your pardon, the second report. Yes, okay. Are there any questions at this point to Alethea or to Megan? Right, can I start, Gurinder?
Thank you, Commissioner. I think it's an excellent report, and it details a lot of work being done in a lot of different areas, and particularly taking account of vulnerabilities. And I think it certainly provides me with a lot of reassurance in relation to a lot of the some of the real difficult issues that have to be dealt with, and which are continuing to be dealt with. The question is because of the because we're in very different kind of environment to what we're used to, because the environment is changing as we come out of lockdown. There will be a lot of people in different circumstances who actually will be affected in different ways that we haven't had to deal with before, or the authorities haven't had to deal with before. For example, you know, those people who would usually attend faith places of worship and reliant on them for their social, mental, physical health, and suddenly are not able to. You know, what can we do, or what are we doing to anticipate or work with partners within our community to find further vulnerabilities that need to be addressed before things get much worse for those people?
Who would like to respond to that one? Alethea?
Yeah, I can start, Commissioner. I would say that the work that we're doing with partners enables us to have a really good understanding about the emerging issues that are arising. So we've got a number of different forums ranging from you know, Victims Commission to look at what is going to emerge post-lockdown. We've got West Midlands CSP and our links into the 7 local authority areas. We've obviously got our strategic links in as well through the Chief Exec, through SCG and all those mechanisms. So in terms of recovery and picking up the issues that are arising or will be arising, we're having those constant conversations through our existing forums. So through criminal justice, you know, as Meg said, they're picking up all of those arising issues there. Through community safety and crime and disorder, we're already doing work around, you know, the issues that the Commissioner raised at the beginning around young men and, you know, the issues that are arising there. In terms of victims of crime, we're going to have a discussion within the next report around what we're anticipating around domestic abuse. We put in, and sorry, this kind of picks up some of the issues within report number 4, but we're putting a bid to the Ministry of Justice, and within there's a contingency budget. So we're looking at putting some money aside, a budget aside, to actually look very much at things that we do not understand at the moment, things that we don't, and you know, that we've not anticipated. We're considering things such as grief management, because we know that, you know, post-lockdown, there are people who have had to deal with issues that they've not really been able to respond to normally. So normally where there's a, you know, a death in the community, we come together, we kind of, you know, look at how we respond to that as a community. We've not been able to do any of that. So there will be repercussions that we can anticipate, but I think that the actions that are going to rise from that, we're picking them up in the different forums and we're responding to them, you know, as necessary. So I would say we're kind of scoping on an ongoing basis across all forums. Have you got anything that you want to add to that, Meg, in terms of criminal justice?
I think it's just a really good point about how we're very focused on the recovery element of that. So that recovery group that sits underneath the regional collaboration forum is looking at some of the emerging issues that we have to deal with now, but we are really focused on what we should be thinking about over the next few months as we do come out of this period, and also not just thinking about you know, what the issues are going to be, but also thinking about some of the things that we've done really well as a sort of partnership over the past few weeks, which we want to be able to retain in a sort of post-COVID world as well. So we're giving a lot of thought to that from a sort of partnership perspective in the criminal justice area, as well as within, I know, sort of the violence reduction unit, and others are thinking about that from a community level as well.
I think I'll just add to that as well, that I think the position we're in and the way that we utilise the Commissioner's powers around convening groups to look at particular issues has put us in quite a good position to actually look at, you know, the possibilities across many areas. So, possibilities around crime and disorder, you know, around criminal justice, around our victims, and you know the particular issues that are arising in terms of backlog of waiting lists and things like that. Those are all things that, because you know the Commissioner's used his position to convene these groups, we already have a lot of those structures in place, so we can utilise them and you know continue to kind of anticipate with partners, you know, what we do need to be thinking about, what we do need to be responding to. So I think we are in quite a good position to carry on doing that.
Okay, thank you both very much. You want to come back? Yes, Grinda.
Yeah, please. So again, I think that is very reassuring. Some of the information we've had there. A lot of the programme talked about work in partnership with a lot of other agencies, including third sector agencies. I'm just wondering whether you've made any assessment or you have any concerns about the organisational health and resilience of some of those partners, and to be able to continue the work they're doing, which is really important, both in terms of the community but also in terms of the Commissioner's programme.
Yeah, so I would say that in terms of the OPC, I mean, if I look at it in different layers, in terms of the OPCC organisational health, we are, you know, we are in the process of developing the OPCC recovery plan. As I said, we're working across each of the 7 local authority areas as well in terms of what recovery looks like, you know, within each of the 7 local authority areas. Within our commission services, we have within, you know, so we've got the VRU, we have the community safety budget, we've got the victims budget, and all of the different teams are working with all of our providers on an ongoing basis to look at recovery, not just in terms of service provision, but in terms of the organisations that are also delivering services. So I'd say that we are, you know, we are working with them on a number of different levels to ensure that as an organisation, they are able to recover on what they need to recover, but also, you know, in terms of service delivery, what that's going to look like going forward.
Okay. Jonathan Jardine, our Chief Executive.
Thank you, Commissioner. I was going to come in on that point actually about organisational health. I mean, the observation I would make is also that there are the recognition that the challenges facing the third sector are significant. There are both local and national initiatives underway. I think the challenge that we face is that there are so many different schemes and initiatives being developed both locally and nationally. It's about coordinating them, and there's a clear role for the OPCC in maintaining that coordination. I think the second observation I would make is relating to the impressive introduction of the Cranston service, and I was just going to ask Meg what we know about the outcomes from those DRRs and the drug rehabilitation requirements and the mental health treatment requirements. What is our mechanism for performance reporting there, and when can we start to see some data relating to that?
So as part of the contract with Cranston and the service that they went live with in January, we have a regular monitoring meeting with them on a quarterly basis. We have worked with them and also actually worked with wider partners to ensure, including, for example, the probation service, to ensure that we're able to collect exactly that data. So that we can see the impact, both the numbers of DRRs and ATRs granted when they are suggested by the Cranston Arrest Referral Service, but also then that we're able to track what the impact is of those DRRs and ATRs, and particularly the impact on reoffending rates, which we are very interested in. We have seen previously that when we've looked at some of this work before around drug rehabilitation requirements and alcohol treatment requirements, that has meant we've seen a reduction in reoffending quite significantly. So we are hoping to see the same with this service. And there's also a lot of work that's been done with magistrates in particular to ensure that they are aware that this service is up and running, that it's consistent, and that also that they should have confidence in the fact that these are well supported interventions and will help to significantly reduce reoffending.
Thank you very much indeed, Megan. Thank you for the question, Jonathan. I see no more hands on this particular paper, so we can now move on to the next paper. I'm delighted to say that Maureen Colony has joined us. So, Alita, shall I hand back to you for the next paper, and then you would introduce Maureen as well, please?
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. So objective 4 and the second report of the plan sets out the commitment to respond to the emergency, including commissioning of services that might mitigate the effects and include a return to normalcy. Although at this moment in time, you know, what we mean by normal is unclear. So we've supported our commission services who've been assessed as key workers, and the Commissioner made a letter available to organisations who needed evidence of their status to assist them when travelling around the region, because obviously our commission services for victims of serious crime were very necessary, and they needed to carry on being able to deliver services or access provision themselves. So on April the 9th, the Chancellor announced £750 million for frontline charities across the UK. And the OPCC has applied for £4.4 million of that money. This kind of goes back to the point that Jonathan, the Chief Exec, made around us supporting our voluntary sector organisations who have been critical and are, you know, crucial to the delivery of services and recovery. So we've applied for that. You know, we're looking to make that funding available as soon as we've been informed how much we've been successful in accessing. At the moment, the government have not given us a timescale on that, although it's you know, interesting to say that the timescales on getting the bid into the Ministry of Justice was really tight. So the critical services for us are obviously domestic abuse and also sexual violence and hate crime as well. So I will ask Maureen Connolly, who is our lead on the Victims Commission around domestic abuse, and also the Chief Executive Officer from Birmingham Solihull Women's Aid, to come in here. And what I've asked Maureen to do is to talk a bit about the services that they deliver, talk a bit about the current situation around domestic abuse as well, and what we're anticipating in terms of recovery once the lockdown has been relaxed. Is that okay, Maureen?
Maureen, the floor is yours. You need to unmute. Maureen, you're on mute. It's okay.
You're on mute.
I'm really sorry. I was really stuck on my presentation. I couldn't get out of it. Apologies for that. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, we're ready when you are, Maureen.
Okay, I'm ready. I just wanted to say that partnership working has never been more important than it has been during these last 7 or 8 weeks. And I think that in the main, we've been able to rise to that challenge across the whole of the West Midlands. Just want to throw some things out there about the COVID period. And just one of the things I'm going to say is that COVID does not cause domestic abuse, in case anybody thinks that. What we've done is been able to shine a light on the reality for women and children living with abuse. And some of the things that are really key that we've identified during this period is a real lack of accommodation, whether that's for permanent housing and refuge spaces, awareness and understanding, secure pathways, hardship, whether that's welfare reform, food and fuel poverty, and that there's been a real increase in domestic abuse related homicides. And what's on the record so far demonstrates that there's at least 3 women a week that have been killed rather than the 2 before the pandemic, and we believe that's higher. The start of the lockdown, it was really hard for women to call at all. The numbers went down, up and down the country. Although I know there was reporting nationally of high levels of reporting, that was not being mirrored in the local groups. And in some places it dipped to a very low number, which was extremely concerning. But we're waiting for the surge, and we anticipate a surge at the end of this process. We know that there was evidence of abuse in half of the cases where women have died, that there was previous abuse. And we know that the DHR learnings and the femicide centres have recognised that coercive control is still a challenge for professionals to actually identify. And I recognise that challenge, but it's something that we need to actually be thinking about in the future. We see that also that 58% of victims refuse to support or help a police investigation. And I think that is part of the coercive control issue, that women do not feel able to do that many times. Some women may choose not to because they don't want to do anything about it at this time. But nevertheless, I think coercive control comes in strongly at that point. And it's really important that we don't see DA in isolation from other social welfare and criminal justice issues in relation to the impact of all of those things upon women and children's ability to be safe. We look at some of the data from March 23rd to the 26th. We saw 117 incidents a day. We saw 146 charges, summons or cautions, and we were in 60% of the lockdown cases able to identify a suspect. These are significant levels of data, bearing in mind the difficulties for victims in actually being able to come forward. We see that by the end of 2019, the prosecution had fallen by 24%, and only 8% of domestic abuse cases dealt with ended in a positive outcome, which includes charge, caution and community resolution. So that's a fall of 40% over the last 6 years. And we know that children are victims too, and Ofsted say that 77% of children are at risk. We go on to MARAC, and we can see over the, I mean, I'm looking at the last 6 years because they're more relevant, but we can see the massive increase that has taken place that mirrors the issue of the downwards turning, I think, the criminal justice system and other alternative methodology, and demonstrates the impact of that, in my view, when you mirror it against what has been happening. And I think that's one of the key drivers of the level. And I've had to use Birmingham data here because whilst I'm representing a partnership, it's quite difficult to get all the data together in the time I had to prepare. But this is Birmingham's data, not for the region, and we've put a trajectory if it continues. What I would say is over the last year, there was a slight reduction in merit referrals, but that represented a change in practice about the numbers that were allowed to be at MARAC, but I'm anticipating that will go back up again on the basis we're going to be instituting 2 more MARACs a month. And so I think that will go back up again. I think the specialist sector has risen to the challenge. I think that within a week, or well, in 5 days, all of the partners had changed their methodology, written their policies, procedures, as were all of us, sent our staff to work elsewhere to make it safe in the workplace and for women and children approaching services. We've extended our helpline hours into weekends and bank holidays, and we've enhanced the pathways across the region with the cooperation of the partners in the consortium. We've opened live web chat services, and also where they already exist, we've increased those. We campaigned and lobbied government for bed spaces to help us with paying for emergency accommodation. Unfortunately, that was pushed back by government to local authorities. But we have negotiated, in Birmingham, we've negotiated a significant number of bed spaces with some registered providers, and one very good exempt provider, a permanent home. So we will be able to have some significant move on over the next few weeks as we anticipate the lockdown reduces, you know, and I think that what we're trying to do is make space for those women who are coming forward. We've been offering online training and advice to professionals. The most recent one is about teaching and children's workers, childcare workers, in relation to what children may have been experiencing, and we've just launched an online training service for those. And we've had a cross-organisation collaborative approach. I thought the next slide just might be useful to see what happened, and I wish I'd put the week before in actually, but I haven't. I just think you can see that there wasn't a dramatic increase, and the first increase came when the first third week had ended, when women obviously felt they couldn't act, and at the end of that third week we had quite a spike. We can see that the number of refuge this week, where the lockdown has been almost announced as not happening anymore, more or less. We can see that we've had more. We had a lot more at the hub during that week. So we've gone from 2 at the beginning, which was really low in a week, and to 103 this week, which does indicate that women are starting to come forward. And we had a lot of triage requests for help and support as well, which is the homelessness work. So a lot of requests for refuge. And so we can see now there is an upward turn on the day-to-day. This is just front door data. It's only coming through at what we call our front door. I want to move on to the No Excuse for Abuse campaign, because this was absolutely vital, and I'm glad that the Police and Crime Commissioner was able to support this, because I think it was an important initiative. Because what we were aware of, women couldn't get out, they couldn't make phone calls, how are we going to get to them? And I think, and the other thing we wanted to do was to just raise awareness with friends, family and neighbours that they had a responsibility too, that it isn't a private, it's some, I mean, some people still think you don't talk about things and don't do things, and we wanted them to know that they could act too. And so the campaign went across the whole region and was primarily focused on major supermarkets. And I think that was really important, because that would be a place where women would be allowed to go. There would be no expectation that anything else would happen. And so I think that was it's that thing about if as a society we don't give the message that this is unacceptable and we're there for you, that fails women and children affected by DA. I think quite often they feel quite alone, and I think it was a really important message, and I think it was well done as a partnership approach to actually getting the message out there. So thank you for that. And in the next steps, I just think we've been focusing very much on the here and now. Wherever I've been sat in partnerships, we've been talking about the here and now. And I think we've got to be looking forward. I think we've got to be looking at what we anticipate is coming. And I still think there's going to, as the restrictions loosen further, that there will be more numbers coming forward. And at the same time, police will be dealing with different crimes than they have been during the last few weeks, which gave them some capacity. And I want to comment on that, because I think that what I saw during that COVID period was a real ramping up by police on their responses to DA. And I know I wrote to Louisa just to say there was some cracking pieces of work taking place with the police, and some nice partnership work as well. I think we saw them being really proactive in trying to make women and children safe, and that was recognised across the region in the main. And so I think it was important to mention where the police had capacity, they acted, and they had started to understand the impact of COVID. Very quickly they recognised that on the safety of women and children in their homes. I think we need to take away some of that learning though, because whilst I'm acknowledging that there's a capacity issue when you've got the levels of other crime that is being managed by police, is that I believe that DA could get lost again inside of this. So I really, and we had at the AIG, we discussed this about what would we learn from what had been happening during this process about what our practice could be in the future. And that's a collective thing of how we work together as well as how policing takes place. So I think that is something that we do need to do and look at how are we going to manage the future. We need to review statutory duties across the piece, including access to refuge and support, and look at the CJS route to try and increase the positive outcomes through the criminal justice route, because that 8% is really not satisfactory, and that does include cautions and community resolutions. They're very low numbers. I think it's less than 6% that are positive in relation to getting support. And we need to increase the use of DVPOs. And the other thing I just want to remind is the messaging that's coming from government now is about what the future holds for us in relation to the return and the ramping up of austerity. And they've been very, this morning I heard ex-leader, I can't remember what his name is, the ex-leader of the Tory party, saying that it's going to impact more upon the poorest in society, which is a hell of a statement to make. And so I think we know that DA, poverty impacts on women and children's ability to escape abuse, and there will be cuts in service. I think there's no question around that austerity is going to be severe to pay back the cost of this, and it will come from the poorest in our society. And I think we need to know that, because it's something that, whilst we haven't got pound notes to put in people's hands, I think it should be part of any strategy to understand the impact of what's coming. And that's that. Thank you.
Maureen, thank you very much indeed for that and for your presentation, and thank you for the work that you're doing. You're doing some really excellent work at a very difficult time. I'm going to bring Jonathan in a moment. Just before I do, Deputy Chief Constable Louise Rolfe, I mean, just a very brief point. Maureen just made the point there, you know, could domestic abuse get lost amongst other crimes? Could you just give some reassurance there?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Maureen. That's really, really helpful. I think, you know, a thank you to Maureen for the work that she's been doing to support us and steer us through COVID-19, and other partners who've helped us in terms of developing our response to domestic abuse. Domestic abuse is a priority for us. It's something that we really actively monitor through our tasking processes, and at the moment through our daily tasking process. We're really keen to understand the number of outstanding incidents or calls. Have we responded in a timely manner? How many outstanding suspects are there? And this will remain a priority. We're already actively thinking with partners like Maureen and others about whether there might be a surge in reporting as other agencies come back online, and some of those usual referral mechanisms like GPs and others are able to tell us about victims of abuse. So we're actively preparing for that, looking at how we can deal with it, and like the support sector, taking the learning from our response during COVID-19 and the fact that we found that victims have been using things like live chat and online reporting really successfully, to look at how we continue to support those mechanisms and it all works.
Thank you very much indeed, Louisa. Jonathan, you wanted to make a point.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Maureen, for that presentation. I just want to ask you about one of the issues that was flagged up nationally. The national helpline, some of the national helplines relating to domestic violence and domestic abuse reported significant increases in calls for support early during the crisis, whereas locally we saw a dip in the first few weeks. Therefore, what do you think? How would you explain that? And then also, are we getting are those national helplines appropriately referring people into local services, or is there an issue there we need to address?
You're on mute, Maureen.
Sorry, it's hard for me to comment on what was going on in the national helpline. I know that I have meetings up and down the country with, well, I don't go up and down the country, but with people up and down the country of who run DA services. And no one has seen the increase they've had nationally, and neither have they necessarily had the referrals into their services. So I can't answer that question. I don't understand it. And we thought we were failing, and so we were phoning each other and to see if we were failing women. But there was no difference that I found anywhere. There may be some blips in other places, but not that I found. So I can't explain it, Jonathan. I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks, Maureen. Can I bring in Dr. Kath Hannon, please?
Morning, Maureen. Thank you very much for your presentation. You've spoken there about recovery and also learning from where we are with COVID-19. That's something that we can manage fairly well, I think, within the West Midlands. Do you know what mechanisms are in place to be able to collect that learning nationally, so that there's a national learning from all of this?
I think that there'll be a lot of interest in trying to do this, because I raised this at the IAG for the West Midlands, and I think that's sort of a starting point, because I think there was interest in making sure that happens. I think nationally, I think there will be an appetite to look at this, because I think that we've learned a lot from that as a sector. So I think this will be raised in other areas. So I'm not sure how the system would work, because from the outside, I think there will be discussions and we're looking at the learning from our sector. And then I think the police have got to look at how they responded. I mean, I know how they responded and the efforts made in the West Midlands. I'm not sure about nationally how that worked. So we might have something to offer nationally from the West Midlands. I don't know that, but I think we may have something to offer on a national basis, because I think people did make a big effort to actually change things.
Okay. Brendan, you had a couple of points you wanted to raise with the Deputy Chief.
Thank you, Commissioner. This is really from the DEP's point of view, both nationally as lead on domestic abuse, but also locally. First question is, have you seen at national level the significant increase to 3 homicides a week that Maureen has indicated? And secondly, from a West Midlands perspective, initially the number of outstanding offenders dropped, but then started to rise again. And I wondered whether we had managed to reverse that trend, given the additional capacity that we've had over the past couple of weeks.
So I'll answer your questions in reverse order. In terms of outstanding suspects, yes, I believe we have. It's remained a focus, and I think one of the things we're really well aware of, because we track this data on a very regular basis and always have done, is that we do have a high number of outstanding suspects, but we have some tolerances around where we know that we tend to, or always used to deal with, around 500 to 600 domestic abuse suspects each month. Over the last couple of years, that's increased to nearly 700. So that 700 people we're processing each month. If our number at any one time goes above that, it causes some concern for us, and so we monitor it actively. We've managed to get those numbers down quite significantly, and we had a sort of real concerted push, bringing resources together from across the force just before the lockdown period started. We then found, I think probably whilst we recalibrated about our operational response, numbers crept up a little, but then as soon as we got into our stride with our approach to managing crime and making best use of the resources available, because other demand had dropped during COVID-19, that number has steadily reduced to lower than it normally is, and we've kept it below those 500 to 600 numbers over the last few weeks now, and hope actually to get it down significantly further before lockdown restrictions ease, so that we're in a really good position to deal with any anticipated increase of domestic abuse, either due to lockdown easing or due to what we would normally anticipate through the summer months. To go on to your second question, this is a really difficult one because I've been asked this question a number of times nationally, and it's something that I've given a lot of attention. So my understanding of the femicide census, which is a really excellent piece of work that helps us to understand the deaths of women nationally, is that the femicide census records all unlawful killings of women. I don't believe that actually reads across to them all being domestic abuse related homicide, but I need to check, because obviously I haven't looked at every single one of those. What I'm doing at the moment is working with the support of the National Violence and Public Protection Portfolio led by Simon Bailey, and actually we've managed to gather some support as well from both HMIC Resources and the Operation Hydrant team, who also have a little bit of capacity at the moment to look at. So every domestic homicide reported by forces during lockdown, we are looking at, is there any immediate or quick learning we can take from those particular cases? Now, in terms of the data, the most reliable data on this is that published by the Office for National Statistics, because you'll be aware that the challenges with police recorded domestic abuse data is that we have 43 different crime and intelligence systems that we use nationally to record our crime and incidents across the UK. We are close, you know, over time, we're all merging towards just a smaller number of providers and more sophisticated systems. But we record crime according to the Home Office classifications of crime, and domestic abuse, until the DA bill is in place, is not a crime in its own right. So therefore, we're reliant on a murder, a GBH, an attempt murder, an ABH being flagged as a domestic abuse incident for us to be really sure that it's a domestic abuse crime. So there are some challenges in that. Through Operation Tala, the national response, we have been capturing domestic abuse incidents nationally. Homicide data is slightly more difficult. What the Office for National Statistics will say is that to be you know, confident that you've identified a trend, you need to look at a 3 to 5 year data picture. So whilst I take incredibly seriously any suggestion that domestic homicide has increased during lockdown, I think sadly only time will tell, but that does not mean that we shouldn't be responding to every single one of those and capturing the learning as quickly as we possibly can, so that we can adapt our policing response. I hope that helps with the question. Yeah. Not a straightforward answer, but it's a very difficult one to answer right now.
Okay, thank you very much, Deputy. Thank you, Brendan. Kath, you want to come back in?
Yes, regarding the project which is called Counting Dead Women, which has been referred to, that isn't just about domestic homicide, it's about violence to women nationally and in all sorts of different situations, albeit there are a number of domestic abuse situations recorded, and a number not just where husbands have killed wives, there's also grandchildren who've killed their grandparents. I think one of the strengths that does come out of that, though, is of the 100 odd cases that are there are only 2 cases where the offenders are still outstanding, and that was to do with a domestic burglary offence. So in addition to information about the offences, the offenders and the victims, there's also some strength there that there are no outstanding suspects in all of those, apart from those 2 cases, which I think is a positive point out of it all as well.
Maureen, did you want to come in there?
I did. I just want to reassure people, because I agree about the ONS. I mean, and all of my data normally would look at ONS, but because it's such a recent period of time, that was not possible. And I actually spoke to the author of the femicide census, and these cases were only DA related, and she doesn't believe she's up to date yet during the whole of the period. So haven't used any other deaths, only DA ones. Okay.
Okay. Was there anybody else wanted to contribute? Alethea, did you want to make any more comments or some closing remarks?
Thank you, Commissioner. I think what I'd like to add at this point is that so this is one of the areas of work that we've been doing. Obviously, DA for us is one of your significant priorities. So the work that we did in terms of the No Excuse for Abuse campaign, we came up with that, worked with partners right at the beginning because we could see the effect that lockdown was having on victims. I'd just like to kind of pull in the fact that we've got the violence reduction unit, that are working in the same way with partners, with within communities, with their commission services. So the depth of delivery that we're looking at within DA, we're also looking at that across all of our areas of work. So that's that's criminal justice, that's the violence reduction unit, that's criminal justice. So it's just to reassure board members really that, the amount of interrogation that we're doing, the amount of delivery that we're doing, the amount of scoping that we're doing to try and anticipate the kind of impact of COVID, both now but also in recovery, cuts across all our areas of delivery. And what we have managed to do is maintain all of our services, from, as Jonathan said, pension forfeitures to custody visiting, that's being done remotely now, to appropriate adults. So all of our systems are still taking place. We've looked at domestic abuse as a particular area because I know that members were keen to know what's going on. But it's just to reassure you that across all of our areas of delivery, that is the level of work that we're doing.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Alethea. And Maureen, can I thank especially you for coming in and joining us today. Thank you for your contribution. And again, once again, thank you for the excellent work that you're doing. I mean, it's partly as a result of the No Excuse for Abuse campaign that we've led from my office with local services. We've seen an increase in reporting of domestic abuse after we had a short period of decline. This is an area of crime that's still very heavily underreported. And we had early concerns that the lockdown was discouraging people from actually coming forward and reporting cases. So I want to give that reassurance that we've heard today in the report. Those services are there. They're there for people to come forward and receive those services. And I'm glad to say that the campaign has certainly achieved some of that. I mean, to help services adapt to the challenges of COVID-19, including those supporting domestic abuse victims in the West Midlands, I bid for a further £4.4 million from the Ministry of Justice. And this will be to help victims cope and recover, and absolutely essential. And I'm hopeful that my bid for funding on their behalf will be successful, but only time will tell. So thank you very much indeed. I will now move on to the next part of the agenda, to item 4C. And I'm going to ask my Deputy PCC, Wahid Salim, if you would chair this part of the meeting. Wahid, over to you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I'd like to welcome Chief Superintendent Claire Bell as well from West Midlands Police, who will be joining Deputy Chief Constable Louise Ralph for the next two agenda items. If I may request the Deputy Chief Constable if she wishes to present her paper, and then we will take questions. Deputy Chief Constable.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. I will assume that people have had an opportunity to read the paper, so I will just draw your attention to a few highlights and give you maximum time for questions. So in terms of paper 4C, just a few things I wanted to talk about, what we're seeing in terms of crime through the lockdown period. So we have been monitoring really closely what's happening with our crime as it's recorded and reported to police. So residential burglary generally is 7% of total recorded crime. We've seen a significant reduction. It's reduced by 42% and is actually now a smaller proportion of overall crime. Commercial burglary has reduced slightly less, but we think some of that might be because some of our largest sort of commercial premises are currently closed, and we may experience an increase in reporting when things are re-established and reopened. Personal robbery, obviously a significant priority for us, has reduced by 53.6%. Now, we do know from our analysis of robbery offences that there's quite a lot associated with school closing times, and young people travelling to and from school tend to be victims. So we imagine with schools being shut, that will be a significant driver of that. Another driver is our nighttime economy, pubs and clubs, and people leaving pubs and clubs in the early hours. So we also anticipate those offences might increase when lockdown measures are significantly lifted. Commercial business robbery is a small proportion of total crime and has remained low and stable since early February. It's reduced by about 3% during lockdown. Theft, shops and stalls, or otherwise known as shoplifting, has reduced by 47%, but that is unsurprising with a significant reduction of the significant closure of all those unessential shops throughout our area. Violence, obviously another priority. Youth violence, it has reduced by 60.9% since the 23rd of March, and is actually now a smaller proportion of our total crime. We obviously, as mentioned, the reopening of schools and nighttime economy will likely see an increase of that. Domestic abuse is a significant proportion of our total recorded crime. It normally is 17% of total recorded crime. As mentioned in the previous items, so I won't dwell on this, we've seen a small reduction in overall reporting, but a slight increase in the last week or so, and most of our focus is on preparing for an increase, or ensuring that we can maintain those essential services and reassure victims that we are available to them should they wish to report. Hate crime accounts for 3% of our total recorded crime. It has reduced by 23.7% since lockdown started. Now, this is a lower reduction than other violent crime types. We have picked up notable trends of a focus on the Chinese community, albeit those are small numbers of offences, offending predominantly in residential areas, and we are working with our local neighbourhood teams to support victims and reduce offending. Vehicle crime has also reduced by 43% in the last 6 weeks and remains quite low, most notably theft offences, but probably associated with a reduction of people using their vehicles. I think the main thing to mention in terms of domestic abuse, because we covered a lot in the last item, is that we are working really hard with partners to maintain key services, and particularly safeguarding meetings like MARAC, prioritising arrests of outstanding suspects, maintaining our approach to offender management, and also using our audit mechanisms to understand the completion of risk assessments and the accuracy of our crime recording. We've already talked about the communications to ensure that victims are aware of our approach and aware that we are available and continue to support them. And there's a little bit of data on page 6 about the reporting of offences, so I'll allow you to look at that. And positive outcomes, I think, you know, we've been working really hard to ensure that we make the most of reduced demand in other areas to drive up our focus on bringing offenders to justice. I'll mention what else we're doing to protect children and vulnerable people online. I think really important to say that we're maintaining our very specialist response to internet offences and online child abuse, and we've responded to the National Crime Agency's assessment of threat that offenders would be exploiting lockdown measures and the likelihood of increased number of children online. So we have seen some increased demand to develop intelligence relating to online offending, and we're ensuring that we maintain our services and respond appropriately. We've executed 14 Section 8 PACE warrants on high harm individuals during this period, and maintained our business as usual response. And in particular, we've ensured that we're focusing on ensuring that, because those usual mechanisms for referrals, particularly with schools being closed, GP services operating differently, and we're making sure that officers, when they deal with children in any situation, whether that's domestic abuse or any other interaction, that they are speaking to children and following our voice of the child approach to ensure that we can assess and maintain an understanding of the threat to children. And I think a little bit about our enforcement. One of the things we're quite proud of in our innovation through this response is developing an app for directions to leave. and we're the first force in the country to develop this in a way that it negates the requirement for officers to additionally email ACRO whenever they've issued a direction to leave or a fixed penalty. So those earlier issues we had around the accuracy of our data as the app use is increasing are being resolved. We are monitoring the number that we've issued as well. So to date, when we submitted our paper, 1,755 directions to leave had been issued, and I believe to date we've issued 475 fixed penalty notices. We are monitoring complaints that come in. We have noticed a little bit of a trend, which I think you've seen in media reporting as well, that the public have quite high expectations of how we might respond to others breaching lockdown measures. So we've had a number of complaints about us not enforcing. We've had a number about our treatment of individuals when we have enforced as well. You'll see on page 14 a little bit about how we compare with other forces in the ACRO data. Then a little bit about how we're protecting the NHS and essential workers. In summary, at a very early stage, we developed a patrol strategy to ensure that we could focus upon those key sites like hospitals, but also key retail premises, and address sort of concerns from the public and concerns from key workers as well. You'll see that we've done some really good work with NHS, particularly around the Women's Hospital and the Children's Hospital in central Birmingham, addressing very quickly some concerns about antisocial behaviour and anxiety of staff working there, and we have some lovely feedback about that work. In terms of how we work with partners, I won't go through the details of the Strategic Coordinating Group and Tactical Coordinating Group because ACC Jardine did that last time. The priorities at the moment through that partnership arrangement continue to be personal protective equipment, care homes, testing, and establishing effective approach to recovery. And in terms of how we're deploying staff, we've got a really effective silver resourcing cell that is looking at how many staff we might anticipate being absent. The numbers of our staff self-isolating or reporting sick have been well below 500 over the past few weeks, and there's some key learning coming out of that as well, in that in some areas of business sickness levels are actually lower than before COVID-19, and we're taking learning from that about the reasonable adjustments we might provide to people to enable them to be at work in normal business. So there's some really good learning coming out of that. And then supporting volunteering and community activity. 533 members of the public are registered in interest in volunteering. We've worked really hard to ensure that those individuals are gainfully employed, but we're also looking at how we might use them in the future to support our activity around City of Culture, Commonwealth Games, on our generic volunteering. And then finally, I was going to take you through some of the headlines of the proactive work we've been doing to make the most of the reduced demand from crime reporting in this period. So we've already covered domestic abuse and vulnerability, but I think also we've taken this opportunity to really get ahead of organised crime and those who might be causing significant anxiety to our communities through on-street drug dealing in county lines. We've executed 55 warrants during the period of lockdown, seized more than £500,000 in cash, 2.5 kilos of Class A drugs and 1,800 cannabis plants, 6 firearms and 550 rounds of ammunition, all under Operation Inglenook, where we've been working really hard to ensure that we're focused on those individuals who want to cause harm in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Constable, for that comprehensive presentation on the paper. I will invite questions, and I have Tom McNeill, the PC Strategic Advisor first. Tom.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much for the presentation, Deputy Chief. Just wanted to ask another question like I did last time about the risk of online child abuse. Thank you for your comments that you've already made. Obviously, one of the key ways to mitigate the risk, according to police and children's charities, is to make sure parents are aware of the things they can do to spot the risk. And I think I know that West Midlands Police already kind of share some of the kind of easy to understand guidance on their social media platforms and things. What I'm always a bit worried about with guidance of this kind, whether it's to do with this crime or another, is that if you don't follow West Midlands Police's social media, which obviously many people won't, you might not come across it. And so I guess my question is, what is West Midlands Police doing internally and also with partners to really problem solve and make sure that we are reaching everybody when they might not follow some of the more traditional social media or kind of mainstream media?
Okay, so I think some of the best tools available online are through the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Centre within the National Crime Agency, and I appreciate, so I'll come to the detail of your question, but CEOP, as they're known, provide easy to use guides for teachers, for parents, for nursery workers, but also for children at every age. So there are videos and guides that are really age appropriate and excellent to use. Now, we don't just push those out on traditional sort of West Midlands Police social media. We do ensure that we work with other organisations that might have greater access to working with children. Now, obviously, the lockdown measures mean a lot of those sort of day-to-day interactions that children might have at school are not necessarily happening. But I think, you know, we are making the most of the opportunity to ensure that those people that children might be following on social media, so quite often we will try and engage, you know, those people that children might follow online or work with. And I think, you know, organisations like the BBC and the tools that they're providing for children at home have linked into these measures as well. Now, in terms of the detail of our problem solving, I don't have that to hand today, but we can certainly take that away, speak to our specialists in public protection and come back to you with some more detail about that.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Yes, Tom, do you want to come back in?
Very quickly, thanks for that helpful answer. I would be interested in that conversation because just to get full assurance that we're definitely doing everything we can and making sure we're working with organisations which know avenues to communicate this stuff, which, you know, mainstream public bodies and charities don't always know about. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tom. If I can invite Kath Hannon, board member, to come in.
Good morning, Deputy. Thank you very much. My question is about the return to schools for young people. There's been mentioned that schools might become a possible target for increased criminal activity. Is there any plans to proactively help pupils in their return to school so they feel safe in and out of schools, and also using public transport again?
So I think we're in our very early stages of understanding what the easing of lockdown for schools might mean. I think one of the things that could work to our advantage is the staggered return to school. So we're, you know, in our assessment of how crime might change or develop as lockdown measures ease, we're looking very carefully at, you know, will there be a staged or staggered return to school? Will there be, and things like staggered start and finish times could help us immensely in terms of managing that threat. I don't have detailed plans with me here today, but I can certainly speak to those officers involved in that work and make those available to you.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Constable. If the councillors want to come back in, if I can invite the Chief Executive, Jonathan Jardine.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioners, and thank you, Deputy Chief Constable. Broadly speaking, just over a week ago, the regulations and restrictions relating to the crisis were changed. Have any particular aspects of those new that new guidance, that new way of working that's been introduced nationally across England rather in the last week or so, had any particular implications for policing? Any particular difficulties that have been posed by?
Can anybody hear Jonathan?
Yeah, I think we've temporarily lost Jonathan. I don't know if Deputy you caught enough of the question to be able to respond.
Commissioner, I think he might be back. Chief Executive, are you back?
Can you hear me? The question was about the policing implications of the international arrivals proposals, that they go into quarantine for a fortnight after arrival.
Did you get that, Deputy Chief Constable? It's about international arrivals and the quarantine of the international arrivals for 14 days.
Yes, I did get that. My understanding at this moment, and this is from an MPCC briefing a week or so ago, and things obviously may change, but my understanding is that we'd had firm assurance from the Home Office that those measures were to be managed entirely by other agencies, i.e. Immigration Enforcement and Border Force, and that they were not a matter for policing.
Thank you. Okay, I'll move to Brendan O'Connor to ask his question.
Thank you, Wade. Question really for the DEP. I've talked to a number of officers over the last sort of week, 10 days, and one of the things that has been apparent is their sense that with the spare capacity that's been created by the drop in crime, they have relished the opportunity to do far more proactive policing than they've probably done when crime levels were rising, and they felt very pressured. And certainly the incidents of firearm seizures, drug money seizures that you've identified this morning have been really interesting. I just wondered how we can get that narrative of how the police have used the time constructively out to the public, particularly in the context where we need to protect the intention of increasing police numbers over the next year, because this, in a sense, demonstrates what could be achieved with more resources, even if crime levels tend to sort of come back up again once the restrictions are relaxed.
Okay, so a couple of things there. So we have been working hard to get that information out in the public domain. You may have seen Detective Chief Superintendent Mark Payne last week interviewed about some of our success with warrants and seizures. You might have seen the video of a man throwing a safe from a second floor window of a house on Midlands today last night when we raided. So we're doing what we can to publicise our work, but additionally we're working really hard to ensure that we take the learning from the things that we've been able to develop during lockdown. So some of that more innovative use of technology, some of the measures we're taking to manage offenders. So when lockdown started, we were anticipating that actually criminals might exploit the opportunity. So we worked really hard to get ahead. And some of the things that we thought might take us, 6 months to develop, we managed to pull off creatively within 2 to 3 weeks or less. And we're now looking at how we embed some of that learning into our working going forward and do what we can to build that proactive time for our staff in their response to crime. Some of the things we've learned in driving efficiencies and taking the best from things like the 2020 programme and our technological advancements and using them really effectively against crime. I think we know that, of course, things will revert back to a new normality over the coming months. And, like the work on domestic abuse, if we can get ahead and really make an impact on some of our most dangerous offenders or those causing the most harm to our communities now, one, we'll learn from that, but two, we might build ourselves a little more breathing space in the future going forward. I'm a great believer in the 80-20 rule that 20% of offenders are causing 80% of the harm to our communities. This is our opportunity to make a big impact on that 20%. And then our staff actually will have that time to really make the most of this going forward. I don't underestimate that we might be dealing with some significant surges in reporting. Things like, we do know, as Maureen described very well just now, that some of our most vulnerable people at the moment don't have access to those people that might provide them support or might then report concerns to us, like GPs or teachers. And so we've got to be prepared for that increase, but I also think there's a great opportunity to get ahead of crime.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Constable. And I'll invite the last question from Gurinder.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Commissioner. My question is that we're coming out of lockdown now, and there's a number of themes you talked about. My question is kind of in terms of the crime aspect of it all. What learning have you developed or that in the event of future peaks that will be relevant at that time.
Sorry, I'm not sure I caught your question there. What learning have we developed from our response to crime? Is that right?
In respect to we've had to do things in very different ways to how you normally work, and in respect of, so coming out of lockdown now, you'll obviously be making changes again in terms of how you're working, and you described how volume is expected to change in different ways. But then if we were to come back into a peak again in the future, what learning is there?
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I missed your question initially, but I've got it now. So in terms of learning, so the recovery process we set up for the force will capture a huge amount of learning, and I think it probably falls into a number of different areas. There's some learning about our response to the major incident in the pandemic, which has been a really good test of, you'll be aware through the local resilience forum that we have structures that prepare for significant civil contingency threats, and one of those is pandemic. There's been quite a lot of learning from our response. Some of the things we've done have worked very well. Some of them felt a little bit clunky at the beginning, particularly in that partnership space with others, because we all work, we all have different expectations and bringing agencies together. So we are capturing all of that learning through a formal debrief process. So I don't have all of it to share at the moment. We've got some learning from the way that we've managed our staff. Things like, you may have seen the video that was on social media this week of our IT&D team rolling out 1,000 laptops. Now, those laptops were things we had in our supply pipeline for our rollout of new technology over the coming year anyway. We just dragged it all forward, and I think there's some really key learning about how quickly you can make these things happen when you need to, and how we were able to do that, but also be compliant with things like PPE, social distancing, ensuring that our staff could come in and receive learning in different ways. There's a lot of learning from things like how we've managed the health and well-being of our people working from home. There's also learning about the way that our staff have used technology. So one of the things we found is that our officers and staff are using the crime reporting technology or crime recording technology on their mobile devices much more effectively out in the field than they did previously. And the pandemic and the restrictions provided an incentive to use some things and operate more effectively out in the field using the technology, particularly the app we've provided for statement taking as well. So all of that we're capturing. So there's a huge amount of learning that I'm sure we will want to, through that recovery process, probably bring a detailed paper back into the Strategic Police and Crime Board as well to take you through.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Constable. Just to summarise, thank you for the presentation and for answering the questions. I do note on the report the backlog of cases in our courts. The courts are having to operate at a fraction of their normal capacity. And I suppose the social distancing measures are obviously in place, but the government needs to share their thinking and strategy around easing lockdown to allow agencies to properly plan so they can ensure the victims of crime get justice in a timely manner. The overall compliance with the lockdown in the West Midlands has been very good. Over several weeks and across a population of 3 million people, only 1,755 have been directed to leave due to the breaking social distancing rules. After engagement, only a small proportion of those have had to be fined. We would be looking to asking for a breakdown of ethnic categories of those who have received FPNs, and maybe we could pick that up at the next meeting. I would also like to pay tribute to our force for the excellent work that's been done and the pragmatic approach it has taken to maintain public support. To continue to protect our key workers, we have structured patrol plans in place to cover hospitals, supermarkets, and other key sites. The people who are keeping us healthy and our economy running need our support. Policing is prioritising their safety and taking a tough stance on anybody committing crimes against our key workers. So thank you for that. Okay, well, on that note, I will move on to the next paper. If I can again invite the Deputy Chief Constable to give us an overview of the next paper. Deputy Chief Constable.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. I will again assume that members have had an opportunity to read the paper and just draw your attention to a few key highlights. So initially, the provision of personal protective equipment to our officers and staff. You may be aware that Public Health England reviewed the national guidance on the 3rd of May, and with the National Police Chiefs Council, we received some new requirements, particularly for policing on that date, which increased the requirement for the supply. Now, we, at a very early stage in the pandemic, began our planning and purchasing of personal protective equipment, so we've been in a strong position to supply what was required to our staff, and focused really on sourcing, distributing, and then monitoring the usage to ensure that, you know, we have very regular stock takes of kit and equipment, and a really sort of slick mechanism for rolling this out to staff. We've been working with the Police Federation and the trade unions throughout, and had some really positive feedback about both the supply and availability, and that's something that we will be maintaining throughout. In terms of the health and well-being of our workforce, we took an approach at the outset to group our workforce into different groups. Now, there will be some who throughout this pandemic have been working in some of those higher risk roles, for example, the roles supporting the coroner, or those officers working in our dedicated custody suite dealing with detainees who are suspected to have COVID-19, and we've ensured that as a result they have a commensurate increased level of both health and well-being support, particularly things like the availability of counselling, or should they require it, very rapid healthcare intervention. But also at the other end of the scale, those staff who just might have experienced a slight change in their working environment, requirement to work from home, and not having all the sort of daily social interaction of working with colleagues. And we've ensured that we've therefore adjusted our occupational health and wellbeing offer for those individuals that might focus more on the impact of social isolation rather than the requirements of working in a demanding role. Now, as a result of sort of thinking about using lockdown, we're also looking at, one, as we talked about in the last paper, the learning that's come out of this, but also whether there's any learning about our response to dealing with, unfortunately, officers and staff who might have dealt with significant trauma throughout this period. I'll talk a little bit about our approach to recruitment as well. I know the PCC obviously has regular briefings on this now, but we've taken the opportunity to really look at how we might change some of our approach to recruitment. So things like pre-employment checks, have been, you know, we've been looking at how we undertake those, complying with things like social distancing, and using the national guidance that's come from the College of Policing and the Home Office. So lots of things being done over the telephone or paper rather than face-to-face. And we've prioritised our recruitment of student officers over and above everything else, and made the use of the College of Policing's online assessment centre, and had some really good sort of numbers going through that so far. Use of specials and police staff. Now, the Special Constabulary have contributed more than 2,100 hours to frontline policing in just 2 weeks over the West Midlands. A really impressive contribution when you consider that 52 of our 188 strong team of special constables are currently unavailable, either due to self-isolation or because they work in critical NHS roles or food supply roles. So really admirable contribution from our specials, and we're currently working with you in understanding how we might recognise that contribution. Our PCSOs have a key role to play at the forefront of working with our communities. They are able to issue a direction to leave and fixed penalty notices, and they're a key part of our neighbourhood teams and have been working throughout with us. Learning and development. Our essential learning for student officers has been prioritised throughout the pandemic. Much of the learning with the support of Staffordshire University is now delivered online rather than in classrooms, with the exception of personal safety training, which continues. And we have a number of safeguards in place to minimise risk. Those include personal protective equipment, really strict cleaning of the kit, protected space and social distancing, and the introduction of temperature checks before people participate in that training. We are continuing with critical training like taser training with appropriate social distancing measures and refresher training so that we can maintain those specialist capabilities across the force. Also, our development and performance team have looked at new products to support people adapting to their new working arrangements at home. So, you know, sort of top tips and guides for people who are using new technology or new equipment at home. And really just working towards, you know, there's an awful lot of learning coming from our approach to adapting that we can take forward as a more efficient way of delivering learning in the future. COVID-19 testing, so there are some figures in the paper here on page 8, but I have got a sort of up-to-the-minute update to say that as of yesterday, we had then, you know, 1,098 of our staff and associated family or household members had been tested, so that's 487 of those are employees of West Midlands Police and 611 are either from their household or family. Of those, we've received 373 results so far. A very small proportion are positive, less than 40. The great majority negative, with just a couple of people needing a retest because their tests were inconclusive. But you'll be aware that the government portal for people to register as a key worker for testing is now a very slick process, and there is significant availability across our regions for people to book themselves for a test and be able to undertake it. And then moving on to how this might be affecting us in planning for some of those large events. So City of Culture, as you'll anticipate, because of the proximity of the events for City of Culture, it has had a significant impact. However, we're doing an awful lot of work with the City of Culture Trust and Coventry City Council to ensure that we can use this time to plan effectively with them, look at how events might be delivered in different ways. And whilst the events and activities throughout the year will undoubtedly change, we remain committed to delivering the outcomes and the longer term legacy impact of the City of Culture, and we'll be prioritising activity to ensure that that can be done. And also we've taken the time to work with them on some really useful campaigns for young people, social distancing, things like domestic abuse and homelessness, as we have a little bit of sort of downtime working through all the impact. The Commonwealth Games, so it won't be lost on you that a number of our officers and staff who have all the specialist skills to deal with things like a pandemic and to support our local resilience forum are also heavily engaged in planning for the Commonwealth Games. So 19 of those operational officers have temporarily been redeployed from the Commonwealth Games team to support the response to COVID-19 because they have got specialist knowledge and skills, but a core team remains to progress the planning for the Commonwealth Games. The onboarding of our resources into that team to make it a larger team has been delayed until September because of operational requirements, and a number of things have been postponed, but work does continue across the Games operation with the key activity of delivering the combined risk assessment model approach and the venue operational plans, which are on track for delivery by the end of July this year. So overall, we're working really hard with partners to ensure that those things remain on track. And then Brexit. So you'll be aware from all the media coverage that the Home Office is still proceeding towards the end of December deadline. We're aware that draft legal text has been released by the European Union, and there are a number of things going on to mitigate the loss of some of those tools that policing uses effectively at the moment. And we're well engaged with that process through the ROCU and our partners. So we'll, as outlined on page 13, we're doing everything we can to ensure that we'll minimise the impact of Brexit. And then also the impact of COVID-19 on the budget. So the Finance Department is collecting all the costs associated with COVID-19, and you'll see a breakdown on page 14 of those costs. You'll see that the overall cost of COVID-19 to the force is currently £3.4 million, but expected to reach £7.1 million by June of this year. I won't go into those details, and I'm sure you may have some questions. We're also looking at how we might make savings as a result of those, some of the areas where costs have reduced, and you'll be aware of us making the most of BP's offer of free fuel for police vehicles, and obviously we'll be monitoring the impact of COVID-19 on all of our costs associated as we go forward. So that's it in terms of the paper.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Constable, for the presentation. I'll invite questions from board members.
Just come in briefly on that last remark, Deputy. In our report, we say that BP has provided £80,000 worth of fuel. I believe that's updated now to £100,000. So I'd publicly just like to say thank you to BP for making that contribution to us. We can use the money very, very well at the present moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I invite Kath Hannon to ask a question.
Yes, thank you very much, Deputy. My question is about the wellbeing offer. Could you tell us what processes are in place to take feedback from staff about the wellbeing offer and whether we could have access to that? And then my second question is, what is the waiting period for counselling support for staff, and how is that being managed?
So I may bring in Chief Superintendent Claire Bell here, because I don't have that detail to hand right now, but Claire, I can certainly give you some information, but Claire, did you want to come in first?
Yeah, so Kath, you might have to remind me of your questions. I'll work backwards. In terms of the waiting time, I'm not sure of the waiting time for each and every aspect of counselling. Obviously, the Be Well service is available to staff in a telephone form. Some of the counselling options are not available face-to-face anyway at the moment. So obviously there's challenges that all aspects of kind of medical care are facing. We'd have to check for you that kind of how long that's taking. Occupational health appointments, again, vary depending, internal ones are varying depending on what it is they're doing. They've obviously had to change the way they operate significantly. And we have kind of, I suppose, delayed some aspects of medical fitness, things that we would expect, so firearms medicals, taser medicals and things like that, in order that they can focus their time on the kind of more well-being offer that's required, as well as checking if people should be self-isolating and shielding and all of that kind of thing. So we'll, as I say, we'll have to come back to you in terms of the timescales. I'm afraid, can you just repeat the first part of your question?
Kath.
Yeah, it was just to get some reassurance that there are processes in place where staff can provide positive or negative feedback about the wellbeing offer at the moment.
Yeah, so there are a team in pod that were put together fairly early into the crisis. It was recognised, I suppose, that there is a role for line management when somebody is self-isolating, shielding or off sick, or even working from home, but there's also another role. And I think this picks up the point of your question. So there are pod employees who are independent of line management, who are phoning and contacting every individual who is self-isolating, working from home or off sick, to ask them for feedback about how they're how they're getting on, how they're feeling. It offers that kind of independent question to them as well, and that feedback's obviously being gathered and fed in, obviously anonymised into the Silver group that's looking into this. And most of that feedback has been positive, but where there has been an issue, it's been fed in and then been actioned. So I think, does that answer your question around that?
It does, thank you. I think it might be helpful if we could get a more holistic picture of what that commentary looks like.
Yeah, that's fine. I can sort that out.
Thank you.
May I come in, Deputy PCC?
Sure, sorry. Yes, Deputy Chief Constable.
Yeah, so it's just to say, thanks, Claire, that's really helpful. I think in terms of the waiting times as well, so as part of that process to identify sort of the tiers of staff, so those staff that are in that highest sort of tier of either working directly supporting the coroner and the mortuary, or working, and responding to community deaths, or working in the dedicated custody unit dealing with detainees with suspected COVID-19. My understanding is that there is 24/7 immediate availability of support for those individuals, and we've sort of graded it And of course, it might be for those who just want to speak to somebody about working from home, might have a longer waiting time. So I think we've done an awful lot of work to ensure there's a graded response, and we can share that with you as well. And just to add, the trade unions, staff networks and the Police Federation have been very much part of the working groups looking at health and wellbeing, and we've been using them actively to gather feedback from staff as well. And I think it's been overwhelmingly positive so far.
Thank you, Deputy Constable. I have a number of people speaking. So I've got Tom, Mark, Jonathan, and Sarah. If I can ask the questions a bit pitty and the answers even more pittier, that'd be really helpful. Tom.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Obviously, some people are worried that with COVID-19 being so all-consuming, that the government might take their eye off the ball on the Brexit negotiations. So thank you for mentioning that West Midlands Police are engaged in it. You mentioned that the EU has released some wording. Has the government given West Midlands Police or police forces any information about whether they think this is going to be fit for purpose?
I don't know the answer to that question, Tom, I'm afraid. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. If you could get a response back, that'd be really helpful after the meeting, Deputy Chief Constable. So I will move on to Mark next.
Yeah, can I just make a comment, please, about national PPE that's referred to in the report? West Midlands Police has purchased an amount of PPE which has been distributed across other forces. This money will be recovered either from the government directly or from recouping it from the forces that have benefited from that PPE. And just a final thing as well, all these costs that are detailed in the report are being captured by the Home Office to make the case for a refund in terms of the actual money that's been actually spent on COVID across the force over the last month and continues to incur as well. Thank you.
Jonathan, would you like to come in?
Thanks, Deputy Commissioner. Deputy Chief Constable, you said that the sickness absence rate in the force is actually lower now than normal. To what do you attribute this?
So our initial investigation into this would suggest that there may be some occasions that individuals whose normal working environment might not necessarily be conducive to longer term chronic health conditions, and actually the opportunity to work from home and the support that we've been able to provide have enabled them to maintain more time at work. I think there's also a little bit about the psychology of we're dealing with a national emergency and a significant, I mean, what we're seeing is significant commitment from our workforce to be at work. I think that's an incredibly positive thing. I think also there's the factor that with social distancing, we're not seeing people picking up the usual viruses, coughs and colds. You know, people are being fastidious about hand washing, they're maintaining social distance at work and outside of the workplace, and therefore we're seeing a lower incidence of things like gastrointestinal viruses, coughs and colds and other things that you might see through the season. So I think there are a number of factors that are driving that. We're doing what we can to understand them, and certainly we're absolutely picking up with, you know, those people that might have a chronic condition that requires a reasonable adjustment. If we've not achieved that previously, then we must do it going forward for them because they have a valid contribution to make.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Constable. And the final question from Sarah Marwick. Sarah. You're on mute, Sarah.
Sorry, thank you. My question is around risk assessments for staff. And as time goes by, and obviously we're learning more about how COVID-19 has impacts on different people, it seems to become apparent that there are some groups who are more at risk than others. And in the media recently, in particular, there's been reports about a disproportional impact on people of various BAME backgrounds and other groups. The NHS has started putting in place particular risk assessments looking at those factors. Is West Midlands Police doing the same?
So I'll ask Claire Bell initially to help me with that question if she's able to.
Yeah, so through the strategic coordinating group, we've been very aware of this information that's come out, and we're also aware that there's further research being done by PHE to look deeper into this, because I think some of the headlines that have come out in the media aren't necessarily the full picture. That said, there is concerns around a disproportionate impact on particular groups, particularly BAME people. So there is actually a risk assessment that's on the NHS employers website that we've been referring to, and obviously so that has been taken into account in terms of risk assessment, and it's been looked at more holistically in terms of the return to work plans. But we're not knee-jerking into making rash decisions without the kind of evidence base either. So trying to find that balance, and as I say, and as previously been mentioned, engaging with staff associations around how we deal with this information, both as an employer, but also in our communities as well. So it is a moving piece. It's actually down as an issue on our issues log for Operation Kernel as well, because it is an emerging picture, as I say. So hopefully that answers the question a little bit.
Thank you very much, Chief Superintendent Bell. So thank you everyone for the questions, and for the Deputy Chief Constable and Chief Superintendent Bell for answering those questions. We are one of the first forces in the country to recognise the work of our volunteer special constables with a payment, especially as many of them have lost their jobs and have been backfilling for their self-isolating full-time colleagues. After 16 hours of volunteering, a payment will be made at the equivalent of at least a real living wage. West Midlands Police will be forwarding a formal decision to the Commissioner for approval in the next coming days. In the report, it also recognised the fact that COVID-19 have cost the West Midlands Police at least £7 million. We have sent into government a detailed breakdown, as our Chief Finance Officer has said, about the direct costs. After a decade of austerity, it is simply not possible for us to avoid them without consequences for the front line. Our budgets are already stretched, and I am concerned about the impact this will have if the Home Office do not step in. The government are yet to be clear on whether they will cover the cost, will cover our costs, and we hope that the Home Office will come in and cover those costs as a matter of urgency. And on that note, I will hand back to the Commissioner for the rest of the agenda. Commissioner.
Thank you very much indeed, Wahid. We now come on to the penultimate item on the agenda. Deputy Chief Constable, have you any updates that you want to give us?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. There were just a few things I'd like to mention. We talked quite a bit about crime and how we're making the most of the opportunities during COVID-19. I just wanted to mention that we have sadly had a number of murders occur during the last month that I thought we really should mention and acknowledge. So on the 21st of April in Wolverhampton, a 39-year-old man was killed within a property there, and 2 individuals have been charged with his murder. On the 26th of April, very sadly, 31-year-old Carl Gallagher was murdered on the street in Smethwick, and some of you may be aware that this appeared in a social media video. A very, very sad job, and individuals now charged with that offence. And then just on the 12th of May, Gloucester Police, you'll be aware from the news, arrested 2 individuals when the body of a woman was found in a car. And one individual is now being charged with murder in relation to that case, and another charged with assisting an offender, and that case now will be managed by West Midlands Police. So whilst the victim and the scene of the crime are yet to be identified, it's believed to be a Birmingham related case, so we will be dealing with that. Also significant issues in the news. You may be aware that last week an officer was suspended following the arrest of a man in Digbeth. The man arrested sustained a broken ankle during the arrest, and the case has been referred to the IOPC for independent investigation. And also on the 15th of May, the IOPC confirmed that they were investigating a number of incidents that related to another officer regarding the use of force. I think, you know, this is a difficult time for our officers at the moment, responding with some of the uncertainty around lockdown, and but our officers on the whole come to work to do a really good job for the communities of the West Midlands, and I think they expect their work to be scrutinised, and we will be doing everything we can to ensure that these matters are independently investigated and working with our communities to understand the impact of them. I think we've had some really good outcomes from our work. I mentioned earlier some of our seizures, but also I should mention the work against off-road biking, which I know has been a significant nuisance to our communities. More than 140 bikes have been seized during the lockdown period, and some of you may have seen the footage of a pursuit of an off-road biker released the other day. So a busy time, some difficult cases to deal with, but the officers continue to work incredibly hard across West Midlands Police.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief. Is there any quick question anybody wanted to pose to the Deputy Chief? I see no indication. So thank you very much indeed, Deputy, and thank you for the presentation today, and by Chief Superintendent Claire Bell as well. And also for you, Alethea and Megan Jones, who did the earlier presentations. Thank you. We come now to the last item of the agenda, which is the date of the next meeting. Just before I bring the Chief Executive, Jonathan Jardine, in, we will be taking a report at the next meeting on use of force. And there has been some renewed interest locally and nationally in the use of taser. And we will be including that in there. Just for clarity, there were some newspaper reports over the weekend that the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners was supporting a report and had some misgivings about the training of officers. I understand that it was not an APCC position. It was a position of one PCC, to which he is totally entitled, but it was not the position of all of the PCCs. Could I now bring in Chief Executive Jonathan Jardine, please?
Thanks, Commissioner. The next meeting is on the 16th of June, and we'll be moving back towards a more routine work plan for the remainder of the year, and we'll be reporting that to the board at the earliest opportunity.
Thank you very much indeed. Is there any comment on that? No. Well, that is, if that's the case, then we have concluded the agenda precisely on time. It is now 12 noon. So thank you all for your contributions and for keeping them, as Wahid said, pithy and to the point. We've got through this in time and very efficiently. I hope for members of the public it has been a useful exercise. And if people have questions they want to put in, it may be difficult to bring people in individually on the call, but if people submit questions in writing beforehand, we will make every best effort to include those on our next agenda, which is going to be the 16th of June. So in conclusion, again, Deputy Chief, the very best of luck to you in your new post. And who knows, you may be reappearing back in our area in yet another advanced capacity. But we look forward to that. We wish you very, very, very much to the best. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you all.